Ford once built an engine so radical that NASCAR banned it before it could race a single lap. You probably think you know the story of Ford's legendary racing engines from the 60s. But what you didn't know is that Ford created a monster so advanced, so powerful, and so controversial that it changed motorsports forever. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 20 weird facts about the 1965 Ford 427 SOHC Cammer that prove this engine was decades ahead of its time, including one fact that shows how this banned engine actually dominated drag racing for years after NASCAR said no. The 90-day wonder Ford's engineers pulled off the impossible when they designed the entire SOHC 427 engine in just 90 days. That's right, 90 days from concept to running prototype. To put that in perspective, most automakers take 3 to 5 years to develop a new engine from scratch. But when Chrysler's 426 Hemi started dominating NASCAR in 1964, Ford knew they needed something revolutionary, and they needed it fast. The pressure was intense. Ford's racing program was getting embarrassed on track, and Henry Ford II wasn't the type to accept losing. He gave his engineers an ultimatum: beat the Hemi or find new jobs. The team worked around the clock, sleeping in the engineering labs, eating at their desks, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible with 1960s technology. What they created in those 3 months wasn't just an engine. It was a masterpiece of engineering that incorporated overhead cams, something no American V8 had done before at this level. The fact that they went from blank paper to fire an engine in 90 days remains one of the greatest achievements in automotive engineering history. Many modern engineers with computer-aided design and simulation software still can't believe Ford pulled this off with slide rules and drafting tables, banned before it could race. Here's the kicker that still stings Ford fans to this day. NASCAR banned the Cammer before it ever turned a competitive lap at Daytona. The sanctioning body took one look at Ford's creation and essentially said, nope, too advanced, too expensive, you can't race it. The official reason was that it wasn't available in production cars, but everyone knew the real reason was that Bill France didn't want to see Chrysler get beaten by something this radical. The timing of the ban was particularly cruel. Ford had already invested millions in development, built race-ready engines, and prepared teams for the 1965 season. Some teams had even installed cameras in their race cars and were testing at Daytona when the ban came down. Imagine spending all that time and money only to be told your masterpiece wasn't welcome at the party. What makes this even more frustrating is that NASCAR had previously allowed other special engines that weren't in production cars. The politics were obvious to everyone. Ford threatened to pull out of NASCAR entirely, and several Ford teams did boycott early races in 1965. The ban created a rift between Ford and NASCAR that took years to heal, and some say Ford never truly forgave Bill France for killing their engineering marvel before it could prove itself on the track. The 6-foot timing chain. The Cammer's most distinctive feature was its incredibly long timing chain, measuring nearly 6 feet from end to end. This wasn't some delicate bicycle chain either. We're talking about a heavy-duty, double-row chain that had to be precisely engineered to handle 8,000 RPM without stretching or breaking. The chain snaked around the front of the engine like a serpent, connecting the crankshaft to both overhead camshafts through an elaborate system of sprockets and idlers. Engineers had to get creative with the chain path. It wrapped around a drive sprocket on the crank, traveled up past 2 separate idler gears, and finally reached the cam sprockets sitting proudly atop those massive cylinder heads. The whole assembly looked like something from a Swiss watch blown up to automotive scale. Ford even had to design special chain guides and tensioners to keep everything in perfect alignment. The length of this chain became both a marvel and a headache. In racing applications, the chain could stretch under extreme spring pressures, causing timing variations that drove crew chiefs crazy. Many racers eventually converted to gear drives to eliminate this issue. But the original chain setup remains one of the most audacious pieces of engineering ever attempted on an American V8. Just imagine trying to time this beast in your garage without the proper tools. The two-stage drive system. Ford's engineers came up with an ingenious two-stage drive system that nobody had seen before. Instead of driving the overhead cams directly from the crankshaft, they installed a short primary chain that turned a stub shaft located where the traditional camshaft would sit in a standard FE engine. This intermediate shaft then drove the long secondary chain that reached up to the overhead cams. This wasn't just clever packaging, it was brilliant engineering. By using the existing cam bore in the FE block, Ford could maintain much of the original block architecture while adding the overhead cam system. The stub shaft also provided a convenient location for driving accessories and maintaining proper chain tension throughout the system. It essentially acted as a transfer case for cam timing. The complexity of this system scared away many mechanics who were used to simple pushrod engines. You had to time the primary chain first, then the secondary chain, making sure everything lined up perfectly. One tooth off anywhere in the system, and you'd have bent valves and broken dreams. But when it all worked together, the precision was beautiful to behold. This two-stage approach influenced engine designers for decades and proved that American engineers could think outside the traditional V8 box. The fuel pump runs off an idler gear. In one of the quirkiest engineering solutions ever devised, Ford ran the mechanical fuel pump off an eccentric, mounted on the left side timing chain idler gear. Think about that for a second. Instead of driving the fuel pump off the camshaft like every other engine, or adding a separate drive system, Ford's engineers looked at that spinning idler gear and thought, hey, let's use that. This wasn't just random creativity. The overhead cam design meant there was no traditional camshaft location to mount a fuel pump. The engineers could have added an electric pump, but in 1965, mechanical pumps were more reliable for racing. So they machined an eccentric lobe onto the idler gear shaft and mounted the fuel pump right there on the timing cover. The setup worked perfectly, but it added another layer of complexity to an already complex engine. When rebuilding a Cammer, you had to make sure the fuel pump eccentric was properly timed, or you'd have fuel delivery issues. Some racers loved this setup because it meant the fuel pump speed varied with engine RPM, providing more fuel flow at high speeds. Others cursed it when they had to service the pump, which required partially disassembling the timing chain system. Either way, it showed the lengths Ford went to in making everything fit together in this revolutionary design. Degree it like a pro racer. The Cammer came with multi-hole cam gears that let mechanics adjust cam timing in precise 1.5 degree increments. This wasn't some aftermarket modification. Ford built this adjustability right into the engine from day one. Each cam sprocket had multiple bolt holes arranged in a pattern that allowed you to rotate the cam relative to the crank in tiny increments. For 1965, this level of adjustment was space-age stuff. Most engines had fixed cam timing, and if you wanted to change it, you needed offset keys or custom ground cams. With the Cammer, you could dial in exactly the cam timing you wanted for different tracks or racing conditions. Drag racers could advance the cams for better low-end torque, while land speed racers could retard them for top-end power. The precision required to use these adjustments properly separated the pros from the wannabes. You needed degree wheels, dial indicators, and a solid understanding of valve timing events. Get it wrong and you'd have pistons kissing valves in the worst way. But get it right, and you could extract every last horsepower from this magnificent engine. Many modern performance engines now feature similar adjustable cam gears, but Ford pioneered this technology on the Cammer over half a century ago. Main's first oiling system. The Cammer used Ford's side oiler block design, which prioritized oil flow to the main bearings before anything else. This wasn't by accident. When you're spinning an engine to 8,000 RPM, the main bearings take incredible punishment. Ford's engineers knew that if the mains failed, the whole engine was toast, so they designed the oiling system to feed them first. Oil entered the block through passages that ran directly to the main bearing saddles. Only after the mains were satisfied did oil flow up to the cam bearings and valve train. This priority oiling system meant the bottom end could survive sustained high RPM operation that would destroy lesser engines. It's one reason why cammers could run quarter-mile passes at 8,000 RPM all day long without throwing a rod through the block. The side oiler design also featured larger oil passages than standard FE blocks. Ford increased the passage diameters to handle the increased flow requirements of the overhead cam system. They even added extra drain-back passages to prevent oil from pooling in the heads during high RPM operation. Every aspect of the oiling system was designed for one purpose: surviving the brutal punishment of all-out competition. This attention to detail is why many cammers are still running strong today, over 50 years after they were built. Cross-bolted bottom-end Ford didn't mess around when it came to bottom-end strength. The Cammer featured cross-bolted main caps that turned the lower end into an incredibly rigid structure. Instead of just 2 bolts holding each main cap, Ford added horizontal bolts that went through the sides of the block into the caps. This created a box structure that could handle enormous cylinder pressures without flexing. The cross-bolting wasn't just slapped on as an afterthought. Ford redesigned the entire lower block structure to accommodate these extra bolts. They had to add bosses to the block sides, machine precise holes through the block and caps, and ensure everything lined up perfectly. The result was a bottom end that was virtually indestructible when properly assembled. This level of strength was necessary because the Cammer was designed to make power through RPM, not displacement. While other engines might peak at 6,000 RPM, the Cammer was just getting started. It could spin to 8,000 RPM reliably, with some brave souls pushing past 9,000. That kind of RPM puts incredible stress on the rotating assembly, and the cross-bolted mains ensured the crankshaft stayed where it belonged. Modern racing blocks still use this design, proving Ford got it right the first time. True hemispherical combustion chambers. The Cammer's cylinder heads featured genuine hemispherical combustion chambers with a wide 48-degree valve angle. This wasn't marketing speak or almost Hemi design like some competitors claimed. These were true hemisphere-shaped chambers that provided excellent flame propagation and allowed for massive valves. The wide valve angle did more than just look impressive. It created a combustion chamber shape that promoted excellent mixture motion and complete burning. The incoming fuel and air charge could flow smoothly around the valve heads without sharp turns or restrictions. The exhaust had a straight shot out of the chamber, reducing pumping losses and heat retention. Ford's engineers spent countless hours perfecting these chambers. They experimented with different valve angles, chamber volumes, and surface finishes to optimize performance. The final design allowed for compression ratios up to 13.5 to 1 while still maintaining excellent combustion characteristics. The hemispherical design also provided room for the massive valves needed to feed this beast. With intake valves measuring 2.25 inches and exhausts at 1.96 inches, the Cammer could move serious amounts of air. These heads flowed better than anything else available in 1965 and set the standard for racing cylinder head design. D-shaped exhaust ports. Ford broke conventional wisdom with the Cammer's unique D-shaped exhaust ports. While everyone else was using round or rectangular ports, Ford's flow bench testing revealed that a D-shaped design with the flat side facing the valve guide moved exhaust gases more efficiently. This wasn't a guess or a styling choice. It was pure science applied to racing engine design. The D-shape served multiple purposes. First, it provided more cross-sectional area than a round port of the same height, allowing more exhaust flow. Second, the flat side created a low-pressure area behind the valve guide, reducing turbulence as the exhaust gases rushed past. Third, the shape naturally accelerated the gases as they exited, improving scavenging and helping pull the next intake charge into the cylinder. These ports were so efficient that they became a template for future racing heads. Ford had to develop special D-shaped exhaust gaskets and headers to match these unique ports. Some racers initially tried to modify them to conventional shapes, only to lose power on the dyno. The D-port design proved that sometimes the best solution isn't the obvious one. It took courage to go against conventional thinking, but Ford's engineers trusted their flow bench data and created something truly innovative. Featherweight valve train weight was the enemy of high RPM operation, so Ford engineered the lightest valve train possible with 1960s technology. The intake valves featured hollow stems that reduced weight by nearly 30% compared to solid stems. The exhaust valves were filled with sodium, which helped transfer heat away from the valve head while keeping mass to a minimum. Each valve weighed approximately 100 grams, which might not sound impressive until you consider the size. These weren't small valves. The intakes measured 2.25 inches across. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than the intake valves in many modern racing engines. Getting valves that large down to 100 grams required exceptional metallurgy and precision machining. The lightweight valves were just part of the equation. Ford also used special aluminum retainers, high-tech valve springs, and carefully designed rocker arms to minimize reciprocating weight. Every gram saved meant the engine could spin higher and rev faster. The valve train was so light that some racers actually had to add heavier springs to prevent valve float. Not because the factory springs were weak, but because the valves would literally outrun them at extreme RPM. This obsession with reducing valve train weight influenced racing engine design for decades to come. No lash adjusters at first early Cammer engines used a primitive but effective valve adjustment system with selective lash caps. Instead of having adjustable rocker arms like modern engines, mechanics had to measure valve lash and then install the correct thickness lash cap on top of the valve stem. It was time-consuming and required a full set of different thickness caps. This system came straight from Ford's racing experience, where every component needed to be as light and simple as possible. Adjustable rockers added weight and potential failure points. The lash cap system, while labor-intensive, was dead reliable once properly set up. You'd measure the gap between the rocker and valve, select the appropriate cap thickness, and you were done. No adjustment screws to back off, no lock nuts to come loose. The downside was obvious to anyone who had to maintain these engines. Adjusting valves meant removing the valve covers, pulling the rocker shafts, changing lash caps, reassembling everything, and hoping you got it right. If you didn't, you started over. Ford quickly realized this wasn't practical for most users and introduced adjustable rockers on later engines. But those original fixed lash setups proved the Cammer was designed as a pure race engine first, with convenience a distant second consideration: race-ready compression. The Cammer came from Ford with 12-to-1 compression as tested, with provisions to go as high as 13.5-to-1. In 1965, those were serious race-only compression ratios that required equally serious fuel. This wasn't an engine you could fill up at the local gas station and cruise to the drive-in. Ford achieved these compression ratios through a combination of dome pistons and tight combustion chambers. The pistons featured carefully shaped domes that filled the hemispherical chambers while still allowing proper flame travel. Getting the shape right required extensive testing and development. Too much dome and you'd get detonation, too little and you'd leave power on the table. The high compression design meant the Cammer was always intended for competition use. Ford knew nobody was going to put this engine in a street car with pump gas barely reaching 100 octane. This was built for racing fuel, whether that meant aviation gas, racing blends, or eventually the wild nitromethane mixtures used in drag racing. The ability to run such high compression ratios gave the Cammer a significant power advantage over lower compression street engines. When fed proper fuel, These engines could make power that seemed impossible for naturally aspirated motors in the 60s. Underrated from the factory, Ford's official power ratings for the Cammer were laughably conservative. They claimed 616 horsepower with a single 4-barrel or 657 with dual quads. Anyone who actually dynoed these engines knew Ford was sandbagging big time. Real-world testing showed these engines making well over 700 horsepower in mild trim, with race-prepared versions pushing past 800. Why did Ford underrate the Cammer? Politics and insurance mostly. The horsepower wars of the 60s were already causing concern among safety advocates and insurance companies. Ford didn't need more attention on their radical new engine. Plus, underrating the engine gave racers a nice surprise when they discovered how much power was really there. The 8,000 RPM capability was no joke either. While Ford claimed the engine would rev that high, they didn't mention it would do it reliably for extended periods. Drag racers quickly learned the Cammer could take sustained 8,000 RPM pulls down the quarter mile without breaking a sweat. Some pushed them to 9,000 RPM or beyond with stronger valve springs. The combination of underrated power and overbuilt components made the Cammer a legend among those who actually ran them. Ford might have been conservative with their numbers, but the stopwatch never lies. Never sold in a production car. Here's a fact that still bothers Ford enthusiasts. You could never walk into a showroom and buy a car with a Cammer engine. This technological marvel was strictly a parts counter item, sold as a crate engine to racers and speed shops. Ford built somewhere between 750 and 1,500 complete engines, though exact numbers remain a mystery. The closest the Cammer came to production car status was when Carroll Shelby wanted to put one in a Cobra. He actually built a few prototypes, but the combination of the Cammer's size, weight, and cooling requirements made it impractical for the small Cobra chassis. The engine was simply too much for a street car in 1965, requiring race car levels of maintenance and care. This parts-only status contributed to the Cammer's mystique. You couldn't just be rich to own one. You had to be connected to the racing world. Ford sold them through selected dealers who understood these weren't engines for casual hot rodders. Each engine came in a massive crate with installation instructions that read more like a technical manual than typical factory documentation. The exclusivity made the Cammer even more desirable, turning it into the ultimate Ford performance statement, even though it never powered a single production vehicle. Dragstrip domination. While NASCAR banned the Cammer, drag racers welcomed it with open arms. The engine found its true home on the quarter mile, where its high RPM capability and massive power output could be fully exploited. From Sneaky Pete Robinson's 1966 NHRA championship to Connie Kalita's 1967 victories, the Cammer became the engine to beat in professional drag racing. The Cammer's success in drag racing wasn't just about raw power. The engine's design made it perfect for the specialized demands of quarter-mile competition. The overhead cam design allowed for radical cam profiles that would have destroyed a push-rod valve train. The strong bottom end could handle the shock loads of launching a lightweight dragster. The excellent breathing let racers experiment with wild fuel mixtures and supercharging. What really made the Cammer a drag strip legend was its adaptability. Racers discovered the engine responded incredibly well to modifications. Add a blower? No problem. Inject nitromethane? The Cammer loved it. By the late 60s, Cammers were powering top-fueled dragsters to speeds that seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The engine that NASCAR rejected became the backbone of professional drag racing, proving that sometimes the best revenge is winning where you're welcome. The gear drive solution racers quickly discovered the Cammer's Achilles heel. That 6-foot timing chain could stretch under extreme valve spring pressure, causing timing variations that hurt performance. The solution came from the aftermarket in the form of gear drives that replaced the chain with a series of precisely machined gears. These gear drives weren't cheap or simple. A complete system could cost more than some complete engines. and installation required precise machining and alignment. But for serious racers, the benefits were worth it. Gear drives eliminated timing scatter, allowing tuners to run more aggressive cam profiles and higher spring pressures without worry. The distinctive whine of a gear drive cammer became the sound of serious horsepower. The conversion to gear drive also simplified maintenance. No more chain tension to adjust, no guides to wear out, no wondering if your timing was still accurate after a season of racing. Pete Robinson was one of the first to popularize gear drives in fuel racing, and his success led to widespread adoption. By the end of the 60s, most competitive cammers ran gear drives. The aftermarket had solved the one weakness in Ford's design, making a great engine even better: the enormous timing cover. The Cammer's timing cover was a work of art in itself, a massive aluminum casting that housed the entire chain drive system. This wasn't just a cover, it was an integral part of the engine structure. The cover included mounting points for the water pump, fuel pump, and various accessories, plus inspection plates for servicing the timing chain. Ford's engineers designed the cover with service in mind, even if the Cammer wasn't exactly mechanic-friendly. The inspection plates allowed you to check chain tension and adjust the tensioners without complete disassembly. There were provisions for adding oil pressure gauges and other monitoring equipment. The cover even included carefully designed oil drain back passages to ensure oil didn't pool in the timing chain area. The sheer size of this cover became a packaging challenge. It extended so far forward that special motor mounts and cross members were often required. Cooling system routing had to be creative to work around the massive cover. But the design was necessary to contain that long timing chain and provide proper support for all the drive components. Today, original Cammer timing covers are prized by collectors and restorers. Their distinctive appearance makes any engine installation instantly recognizable as the legendary SOHC 427. Special water pump design Ford had to design a completely unique water pump for the Cammer because nothing in their existing parts bin would work. The standard FE water pump was too long and would interfere with the timing chain assembly. The solution was a shortened leg design that tucked neatly into the massive timing cover while still providing adequate coolant flow. This wasn't just a cut-down version of an existing pump. Ford engineers had to redesign the impeller and housing to maintain proper flow characteristics despite the compact dimensions. The pump mounting had to be incredibly rigid because any flex could cause interference with the timing chain. Even the pulley arrangement was special, designed to clear the protruding timing cover while maintaining proper belt alignment. The specialized water pump became another example of how every component on the Cammer was purpose-built for this engine. You couldn't just grab parts from other Ford engines and make them work. This exclusivity added to the cost and complexity, but also ensured that when properly assembled, everything worked in perfect harmony. Modern Cammer builders often struggle to find good original water pumps, as reproductions rarely match the quality and precision of the Ford originals. The Shelby connection: Carroll Shelby desperately wanted to put a Cammer in his Daytona Coupe for the 1964 season, but Ford couldn't deliver an engine in time. The Cammer was still in development, and Shelby had to settle for a standard 427. This missed connection became one of racing's great what-if stories. Shelby recognized the Cammer's potential immediately. Here was an engine that could match European sophistication while delivering American muscle. He envisioned Daytona coupes powered by Cammers dominating at Le Mans and Sebring. The combination of the coupe's aerodynamics and the Cammer's high RPM power would have been formidable. But timing and NASCAR politics killed the dream. The story got a happy ending in 2022 when a tribute Daytona coupe was finally built with a proper Cammer engine. The combination proved everything Shelby had envisioned, with the car showing incredible performance potential even by modern standards. It took nearly 60 years, but the Shelby Cammer combination finally became reality, proving that some automotive dreams never die. The fact that enthusiasts still care enough to make this combination happen shows the lasting impact of Ford's 90-day wonder. That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss the next one. See you there.